Environment Minister Barbara Creecy will open the 9th People and Parks Conference today. This is a biennial event which focuses on relations between communities and conservation. Now, due to the various levels of national alert lockdowns to stem the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, the last conference was held in 2018 in Limpopo. For more on this, we now cross to our reporter Nozintombi Miya. Nozintombi, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Take us through what the 9th People and Parks Conference is about and what it stands for.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simpiwe. You know, you're quite right. COVID really has had such a massive impact on, how daily life is done, especially with regards to the impact that it's had on in-person meetings or in-person conferences. And this is the first in-person conference that the Department of Environment has had really in the past 2 years or so. And, you know, what else other than such an auspicious occasion, such as the 9th Conference of the People and Parks event or conference to have it at. And what's so important about this conference, Simpiwe, is that this conference talks directly to the indigenous people that were removed by the apartheid government from those areas that they were living in that now have become nature conservation parks or protected areas. And they were put elsewhere. And with conferences such as this and with, programs such as these, they aim to be able to address those issues of those indigenous people that were locked out of the economic cachet of these such protected areers. And one person that I have with me is also an indigenous person. His name is Lawrence Mokhatlanye, and he's going to give us a little bit more information about what it really means for the indigenous people to be part of programs such as this. Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence. A conference like this is so important for people such as yourself, especially indigenous people that were excluded from the economy of those areas that are protected and from the tourism and access to jobs. What does it mean for you and for people like you to be part of conferences such as this?
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to explain ourselves. A conference like this one is very important in that it gives us an opportunity as communities throughout South Africa. That is, people who have got interest and rights in protected areas, that were able to come as all the provinces to come and take stock of what has happened since the inception of this program way back in 2004, following the Cape Vidal memo that was taking place during the World Parks. It was the 4th World Parks Congress that took place in Durban.
Lawrence, let me cut you in there. A conference like this, with all the words that we're bandying around about conservation and indigenous people, it's all well and good. But for the actual people that were affected, how were they impacted? How did the forced removals by the apartheid government impact on their ability to live in the surrounding areas and to be able to make a living?
Well, they were effectively excluded from benefiting in terms of the economic benefits that were actually accruing into their own land, where they were forcefully removed unceremoniously and then put into the outskirts or periphery of the parks. And people were just simply seeing people coming in the form of buses, going in and out of their place, and they never had any opportunity to can actually benefit in terms of job opportunities and any other thing that is actually, happening within the park, including them actually getting access into the parks to go and do their ancestral, normal issues that they were doing, because some of them in the parks, there are graves of their old people who were there, and we have got people who were practicing, medicinal, healing and things like that. So they got lots of that. But now, once we have this particular time, we have an opportunity to become part of the management and ownership of the land and to be able to reap tangible economic benefits from whatever spin-offs that are coming from the parks.
Dr. Lawrence, now I want us to unpack what you just said now around the issue of the indigenous people now finally being able to reap the benefits. What are the everyday examples of the indigenous people now being able to reap those benefits?
Well, if, for instance, there are construction activities taking place in the parks, it is no longer a question of management just taking those kind of decisions alone. You know, they go together and they even decide in terms of the work opportunities that are arising. Local communities are able to go there and be able to find some work. And the actual people that were removed from the parks, they obviously get a preference in terms of job opportunities. Let's say, for example, there's a need of about 10 people to work in a park. You know, in terms of the 60-40 split that we agreed about in Mafikeng in 2008, about 6 people must be the ones that are getting preference, and then the other 4 will be coming from the surrounding areas. That is done in order to make sure that there is cooperation and a sense of belonging and a sense of ownership of the assets that they were actually excluded from in the past, and to be able to take part in the wildlife economy, which is an area that needs to be transformed so that people can have ownership of those animals and be able to use them and benefit in terms of tourism opportunities that are coming out of them.
Lawrence, but it's not just the indigenous communities that were removed from those areas that are also seeking to get into this space. How is this program aimed at helping the extended community that may not necessarily have been part of the indigenous people that were removed, but are community members that are living there and are seeing these changes taking place?
It's exactly what I'm saying, that they are not actually excluded. We are saying 60% benefit sharing, enjoyment of people who were removed, and then 40% of those that are actually in the outskirts. So that's how it actually happens. Whenever opportunities arise, they all have that opportunity to go and actually become part in terms of enjoying the piece of the cake.
So when we talk about management, can you just explain to me how it works with the beneficiaries? Are the beneficiaries the ones that are running the parks, or are they being assisted? How does that work in terms of the management of the parks?
In cases where the skills are available from within the land claimants themselves, they get preference. And if the skills are rare, they don't actually have them, they get people who are actually skilled to teach them and to become part of that. In other ways, they are doing some kind of a process of taking them through the process so that they are actually able to run that and to be able to get some form of advices in cases where they are actually unable to do that.
Is it also a 60-40 split with regards to the profits? How does that work?
Yes, with regard to the profits, we were actually working towards that, because what is happening us at the moment, that's why we have the Minister of Land Affairs to be here, is to speed up the restitution process. So once the title has actually been given to the communities themselves, they can then enter into agreement with whoever has got the skill, including the private sector, like I'm saying, in terms of, small, medium enterprise development that are taking place there. There are very serious concessions that are making huge profits, amount of monies, which never see their way into the coffers of the communities. Now, once the land has been restituted, then they are able to enter into lease agreements and whatever agreements that are there, the triple P that you've been talking about, because there is that kind of cooperation that must happen between the communities and the government themselves.
Now, sorry, Dr. Lawrence, before we wrap up, an important question around the impact that COVID has had on tourism. Now, with programs like this, tourism is a big part of gaining access and bringing money back into that local economy. How has the COVID impacted on those communities, specifically with the fact that we haven't had any tourism for quite some time?
Well, COVID, unfortunately, caught everyone by surprise, the world around, and everybody was impacted. Unfortunately, in the case of the communities coming from poor backgrounds and things like that, many people were depending on the parks in order to sell their wares. People were actually lining on the road to sell to the tourists that are coming into the area. Once COVID struck, then it means that those parks were actually closing down, and there were no longer tourists coming to the area. Obviously, people were out of job, and that's why we then embarked as People and Parks, together with the department, with the distribution of food parcels to try and alleviate in some way to assist the communities. Some of them are child-headed households, and they've got no other means to survive on. They rely on the work that they actually get from the parks, and also, the selling of their stuff going there. So tourism indeed was highly impacted, and it actually increased a lot of poverty, and at the same time increasing the crime for people to want to begin to get something to satisfy their daily needs.
My final question, Dr. Lawrence, that's absolutely sad and shocking to hear. How are you hoping that this conference today will be able to start putting mitigating measures in place to firstly be able to give jobs back to those community members that were impacted, and also to provide access for the community members who are still impacted to have access to food parcels, access to job opportunities, access to some form of making a living?
Well, we are obviously taking stock in terms of the progress that has actually been made. Communities have got an opportunity to share their experiences, bad ones and very good ones, and then obviously we take the good examples that we are actually learning from each other as communities, as provinces, that we actually take back and come with corrective behavior to some of the issues, because some of the challenges that we're having is the unfortunate part of understanding that we should be able to begin getting from the management authorities. We therefore have this opportunity to speak to them through the ministers that are present with us to say, hey, smell the coffee and wake up. It's a new situation now. We've got to work together as equal partners, communities and management authorities working together to make sure that we transform the sector and get people to be involved in the wildlife economy, which was for a long time, something which is actually outside them. We actually discuss those issues and make sure that people get popped up and get new energy to work very strongly and tirelessly and to, inculcate that sort of relationship and ownership that the parks actually belong to them. They can also assist in terms of preventing poaching and making sure that we look well after those assets.
Much, Dr. Lawrence. Simpiwe, what Dr. Lawrence is speaking about is so important that in as much as this conference is happening here today, and it is the 9th conference, but these are real issues that affected Indigenous communities are dealing with. Being impacted by COVID and not having access to make a living because tourism was shut down as a result of the COVID restrictions. And they also needed to get food parcels. They needed to get some sort of financial assistance from government, from the different government departments, to be able to mitigate against the fact that they had lost their livelihoods. So it's absolutely important for the Indigenous people who are impacted and living next to these protected areas to be part of conferences like this, to raise the issues and find tangible ways to move forward and to find tangible ways to bring back economic empowerment into those communities. And I'm not sure if you heard what Dr. Lawrence said, something so important, especially around big national parks such as the Kruger National Park, which are quite beset with poaching. Being able to help communities around national parks such as the Kruger National Park make a healthy living is one way to help buffer against the constant poaching of animals that we're seeing in the Kruger National Park, such as elephant, rhino, leopard and lion skin and paws. So it is so important for conferences like this to take place and for people like Dr. Lawrence to be part of the dialogue of transformation and bringing economic empowerment back into the hands of the Indigenous people.